You are watching this on the internet, and you assume the internet will be there tomorrow. You assume it will be there next week, next year. It feels as permanent as electricity, as embedded in modern life as running water. In the last 2 decades, the internet has gone from a novelty to infrastructure, not metaphorically, but literally. Hospital systems run on it. Financial markets run on it. Power grids are managed through it. Supply chains depend on it. Governments communicate through it. So here's the question most people have never thought to ask. What is the internet physically? Where is it? What is it made of? The answer is cables. Fiber optic cables. Approximately 550 of them running along the floors of the world's oceans, connecting every continent on Earth except Antarctica. They carry roughly 95% of all international data traffic. They are, in most places, about as thick as a garden hose. And right now, a $60 million project is being built because the people who understand these cables have concluded that the scenario where enough of them are cut simultaneously, deliberately, is no longer a question of if. Here's the misconception most people hold about the internet: that it is wireless. It floats. It lives in the cloud. It travels on radio waves between towers and satellites. For your phone, for your laptop, some of that is true. The last mile between a router and your device is often wireless. But the backbone of the internet, the infrastructure that carries data between countries and continents, is almost entirely physical. It is cable, it is glass. Each subsea cable is a bundle of hair-thin optical fibers, glass strands narrower than a human hair, through which data travels as pulses of light at speeds approaching the speed of light itself. Those fibers are wrapped in layers of plastic insulation, copper conductors, steel wire reinforcement, and polyethylene sheathing. The final cable, in its armored coastal form, is about the diameter of a soda can. In deep water, where there is less risk of damage from anchors and trawlers, it narrows to roughly the diameter of a garden hose. These cables lie on the seabed at depths of up to 8,000 meters. They are not guarded. They are not monitored in real time along their full length. In shallow coastal waters, they are sometimes buried under a meter of sediment. In deep water, they simply rest on the ocean floor unprotected, running for thousands of kilometers through international waters where no single government has jurisdiction. The entire global internet, the system that the modern economy is built on, depends on approximately 550 of these cables remaining intact. They break fairly often. Most breaks are accidental. Ship anchors account for a significant proportion of shallow water cable damage. Fishing trawlers drag equipment across the seafloor and sever cables they did not know were there. Submarine landslides, triggered by earthquakes, volcanic activity, or simple sediment instability, have taken out multiple cables simultaneously in single events. There are only around 60 specialized cable repair ships in the world. When cables break in multiple locations at once, those ships queue. Repairs can take weeks. In 2006, an earthquake off the southwest coast of Taiwan severed 9 cables simultaneously. Internet connectivity across much of Southeast Asia dropped by 70%. Some connections took over a month to fully restore. The economic damage ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. That was an accident, the scenario that has been dominating infrastructure security assessments since 2022 is not an accident. In February 2024, 2 subsea cables running through the Red Sea were severed.
Because the Houthis in Yemen attacked a ship called the Rubimar earlier this year, and 3 internet cables were cut afterwards. Now, most maritime experts believe it was an accident that the cables were damaged as the ship drifted. But with over 90% of Europe-Asia internet traffic running,
the Houthi movement in Yemen was widely suspected. Traffic had to be rerouted around the southern tip of Africa, a detour of thousands of kilometers that added measurable latency to internet connections across Europe and Asia. In the same period, NATO officials publicly stated that Russian naval activity near subsea cable routes in the North Atlantic had reached levels not seen since the Cold War. A NATO assessment described Russian submarines as having developed precise capabilities for locating and severing specific cable segments at depth, quietly, without surfacing, in international waters where the act would be nearly impossible to attribute with certainty. The legal framework for responding to subsea cable sabotage is, to put it plainly, non-existent. There is no established protocol for what constitutes an act of war against civilian internet infrastructure. There is no agreed mechanism for attribution. There is no coordinated international response plan. The 550 cables that carry your data are, in the language of infrastructure security, a single point of failure at civilizational scale. Before we go further, if you find yourself asking questions you never thought to ask, subscribe. We put out one of these every week. It takes 30 seconds, and it means you will not miss the next one. Which brings us to Rivada Space Networks and the project they are calling the Outer Net. Rivada is a private satellite communications company. In 2024 and into 2026, it has been developing a low-Earth orbit satellite constellation designed specifically to function as a parallel internet, a backup data infrastructure that operates entirely independently of the Subsea cable network. The project has attracted investment from defense-adjacent funds and has been in discussions with several NATO member governments looking for resilience options. The architecture is deliberately different from existing satellite internet services like Starlink. Those systems route data from a satellite down to a ground station, then into the terrestrial internet, which means they reintroduce the vulnerability of ground-based infrastructure at the point of connection. The Outer Net design routes data directly between satellites in orbit using inter-satellite laser links before the signal ever touches the ground. You can destroy every subsea cable on the ocean floor, eliminate every ground station, and the Outer Net constellation continues to function as an independent global network. $60 million sounds like a significant investment. For context, a single subsea cable costs between $100 million and $500 million to lay and commission. The entire global subsea cable network represents a cumulative investment of hundreds of billions of dollars, built over 3 decades. The Outer Net is not trying to match that capacity. It is not trying to replace the cables. It is trying to ensure that if the cables fail, all of them simultaneously, deliberately, there is a functioning global communications network that survives, a minimum viable internet, one that keeps hospitals running, financial systems communicating, and governments coordinating, while the repair ships queue.
Free data from space is something called the Other Net system, or it used to be called Outer Net. There was a flurry of publicity for Outer Net back in 2014, 2015 when it first started, and it was essentially a one-way internet or data broadcast from space using the L band, about 1.6 gigahertz, and you could get a little device with a receiver.
Here is what the Outer Net story actually reveals about the world you live in. The internet was not designed for the world it now inhabits. It was designed in the 1970s as a research network, then expanded in the 1990s as a commercial one, and in both cases the assumption was that the entities using it had no interest in destroying it, because destroying it would hurt them too. Mutual dependence was the security model. Nobody cut the cables because nobody wanted their cables cut. That logic is weakening. State actors and non-state armed groups have demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to target civilian infrastructure as a strategic tool. Power grids have been attacked. Water systems have been breached. Hospitals have been held to ransom. The subsea cable network has so far been largely spared. But the assessments coming out of NATO, the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, and multiple independent security organizations in 2025 and 2026 converge on the same conclusion. The cables are a target, the capability to hit them exists, and the deterrence framework that protected them for decades is no longer reliable. The $60 million being invested in the Outer Net is not a large number in the context of global infrastructure. It is a signal. It is what the people who understand the risk think is worth spending to build a contingency plan for the worst-case scenario. The optimistic reading of this story, and there is one, is that the existence of the Outer Net represents something important about how complex systems respond to identified vulnerability. The internet was built without redundancy at the architectural level because the people who built it did not believe redundancy was necessary. We are now, for the first time, building it in. Not because the cables have failed, because we have finally taken seriously the possibility that they might. That is not panic. That is engineering. The next time your internet is slow, or a page will not load, or a video buffers, your instinct is probably to blame your router, or your provider, or the app. The actual reason your data gets from one side of the planet to the other, reliably in milliseconds billions of times a day, is a garden hose lying on the floor of the ocean. It has worked mostly for decades. The people who understand it best are no longer confident it will keep working without a backup. The backup is being built. Subscribe, and we'll keep finding the ones that break the model.